What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of The Coach's Quarters. I am your host, Jacob, and today we are covering what is one of the craziest NFL Sundays that I can remember in recent history. Every game almost was just a crazy game one way or the other. And we're going to cover most of them. I did reformat the show a little bit. We missed our second episode last week as we kind of ironed out some of the details to try and shorten these shows for you guys. So with that being said, we're going to jump right in, and we are going to start with the Houston freaking Texans, baby. Hey, we finally got a dub on the board, and we looked amazing in the process. You know, CJ Stroud went 20 of 30 for 280 yards and 2 touchdowns. Our run game is still a little lacking, but Dameon Pierce found the end zone. And you know what? Our run game might not get going until our offensive line is a little healthier. Laramie Tunsil was ruled out, but that's okay because you know what? It did not matter. Our receivers went off. Rookie Tank Dell out of the University of Houston, somebody that I actually drafted in all 3 of my fantasy leagues this year, went absolutely off with 5 catches for 145 yards and a touchdown. Nico Collins and Robert Woods both only had 34 yards receiving, but again, it didn't matter because Tank Dell absolutely balled out. We did not use our tight ends again. I mean, Dalton Schultz had 1 catch for 9 yards. Brevin Jordan had 2 for 13. But it does seem like that is going to be the norm moving forward. But how about John Mechie recording 2 catches in this game? He had 1 catch in his debut, and he had 2 catches in this game. And John Mechie is just about all the way back, baby. Dude beat cancer, and now he is all the way back, and he is getting better every week, and we love to see it here at TCQ. Our defense was absolutely savage. You know, Will Anderson was the first rookie since J.J. Watt to block an extra point or to block a kick. Our secondary looked amazing. Trevor Lawrence looked rattled all game long. They couldn't get a run game going until it didn't matter anymore. And this game was a blowout. It was 37-17 by the end of the game, but this game was more of a blowout than it looks like. And it was a 20-point game. So that's really saying something. I mean, Henry 2020 had a great game. Shaquille Griffin looked amazing. Jimmy Ward in his debut with the Texans looked fantastic. Blake Cashman finally got to see the field, recorded 6 total tackles, 3 of them solo. We just had so many people contributing. Jonathan Grenard was getting after the quarterback all day. Christian Harris looked good. It was an amazing game. We had a fullback take a muffed kick all the way back to the end zone for an 85-yard touchdown. And just every facet of the game for the Houston Texans looked better than it has in weeks upon weeks. And honestly, we looked better this Sunday than we did any game last year, despite the dubs that we may have had. Houston looked good. Can we count on this to be the norm moving forward? Probably not. I mean, our offensive line allowed 0 sacks, which was the largest contributor to the day. And that's really what allowed CJ Stroud to do what he does best. But you know what? We finally saw a deep ball from CJ Stroud, the one that he hit Tank Dell on for a 56-yarder that almost scored. And Houston looked fantastic. On the flip side, Jacksonville looked terrible. You know, their defense looked confused the whole game. And I know Jacksonville's dealing with injuries just like everybody else, but Josh Allen and Trayvon Walker couldn't get anything going. Like I said, you know, Houston gave up 0 sacks. Was CJ Stroud hurried? Sure. I think Jacksonville had 4 QB hurries on us. But you know what? When our offensive line is clicking, it looks like we can stop people. You know, Josh Allen had 4 sacks in week 1. And he wasn't able to do much of anything against us. So we looked really, really good this week. And I, as a Houston Texans fan, as a Houston Texan native, and as an absolute homer, loved this game. You really couldn't ask for more. You could, because like the game that I'm about to jump into, the Miami Dolphins versus the Denver Broncos, it turns out more can always be possible. Miami hung a 70 burger on the Denver Broncos this Sunday in what was a historic game. They were if they would have kicked the field goal there at the end of the game, they would have broken all the scoring records in the NFL. And quite frankly, that game was just nuts. From the start to the finish, that game was just absolutely crazy. If you had absolutely any number of the Miami Dolphins players on any of your fantasy teams, or if you're just a Miami fan in general, or if you're, like me and you hate the Denver Broncos, and it has nothing much to do with the Denver Broncos. I'm just not a Sean Payton fan, and I think Russ Wilson's a bit overrated. But if you are any of those things, this game was electric from start to finish. Now look at this. Tua Tagovailoa, 23 of 26 for 309 yards and 4 touchdowns. That dude was pulled in the third quarter. Mike White went 2 of 2 for 67 and a touchdown and looked just as electric as he did when he played for the Jets. Devon Achane, I'm pretty sure I'm saying that wrong. I'm just really struggling pronouncing that name. He went to Texas A&M. He looked amazing for the Aggies. He was one of the only Aggies that I've cheered for in recent history. He looked amazing. 18 carries for 203 yards and 2 touchdowns. Raheem Mostert, it was somebody that I picked up on the waiver wire right before this week's games. 13 of 82 with 3 touches on the ground, and he had added another one in the air. You know, their rookie 4th string running back, Chris Brooks, ended up taking it was like a 54-yard run to the house, or almost to the house, but he had 9 carries for 66 yards. And then you look at the receivers, Ty Hill, 9 receptions for 157 yards and a touchdown. Robbie Anderson, or Robbie Chosen as he goes by now, had 1 catch for 68 and a touchdown. Raheem Mostert had 7 catches for 60 and that touchdown I was just talking about. Achane had 2 touchdowns through the air, 4 catches for 30 yards. Braxton Berrios got in there. Durham Smithy had a catch. River Craycraft had a catch. This was an absolutely legendary game for the Miami Dolphins. Again, they scored 10 touchdowns. There were no field goals kicked by the Miami Dolphins. They were all touchdowns, and every single one of them was just impressive as the last one. Whereas on the flip side, Russell Wilson had a very average game for what he has been able to produce since joining the Broncos. You know, he only had but he went 23 of 38 for 306, a touchdown and a pick, which, you know, on an average night, that would have been enough to almost do them in, or to almost get them to where they needed to be. They had no run game. Cortland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy combined for quite a good game. Cortland Sutton had 8 for 91 and a touchdown. Jerry Jeudy had 5 for 81 and no score. Marvin Mims, the rookie, had another good game, 3 for 73. It's looking like that dude's going to be a pretty consistent fantasy option, even though he's 3rd on the depth chart. But the big story here was Denver's defense. You know, going into this year, Denver's defense was supposed to be really good. Denver's defense had all these people talking about them, and they got cooked. They couldn't stop the run game. They couldn't stop the play action. They couldn't stop the normal passing game. It did not matter what Miami did. Denver could not stop it. Denver couldn't stop their backups after the third quarter when all of the starters got pulled, and it, you know, you kind of thought that, you know, maybe Denver could have done something, not come back, not get the score closer, but they could have maybe scored some points, could have maybe stopped the Dolphins a little bit. It did not matter. Denver looked awful. You had post-game interviews from like Garrett Bowles, who said that he's been there for 7 years and all they've done is lose. Kareem Jackson narrowly avoided a suspension for another dirty hit, something that he's been really good about since leaving Houston. Alex Singleton had a good game. DeLauren Turner-Yell had a good game, but they had good games because Miami's offense couldn't be stopped. So, I mean, they were able to kind of pad the defensive stats because they were almost never on offense. Time of possession was crazy for Miami. And, you know, you get a lot of chances at the mid and the secondary level to make tackles when you're, you know, front 4, front 3, whatever you're running, front 5. Whenever they can't actually make a single tackle, you know, you get to kind of beef your stats up a little bit because it always comes to you, right? And then on the flip side, Miami's defense looked amazing. I mean, they held Denver at only 20 points. And 20 points is a decent amount of points in the National Football League, right? These guys are all professionals. But it didn't matter, right? Like, it just didn't matter. Javon Holland had a great game. Dude's an absolute ball hawk. You know, Deshaun Elliott looked really good. Xavier Howard seems to be all the way back despite the off-the-field troubles that he's experiencing. Emmanuel Ogbah looked good. Jerome Baker looked good. It is just one of these things where at all facets of the game, Miami looked better. And Miami, again, had a historic day. It was the best game of Sunday, depending on how you look at it. I mean, it wasn't close. And it only felt like one of these teams was playing, but Miami put up Madden numbers. So this was a really, really cool game to watch. And again, if you're a Miami fan, hey, you are the powerhouse of the AFC. As of right now, where we stand right now, Miami should be the team that is representing the AFC in the Super Bowl this year. We're going to get to the NFC side for that here in a little bit. But Miami's good, man. Miami is very good. I can't wait to have the friend of the show, Joey McGinnis, back on the show to talk about them because, man, Miami is going to be fun to watch moving forward. Moving on, another game that was a blowout, but not a historic blowout like Miami over the Denver Broncos. But the Bills versus the Commanders was one of the games to watch going into this game. Washington was undefeated. The Bills were 2-1. The Bills seemed to be, improving on that loss to the Jets in week 1, where there was a lot of turmoil going on with the loss of Aaron Rodgers and this, that, and the other. And the Bills absolutely crushed the Commanders. The final score ended up being 37-3. And honestly, it wasn't even quite as close as it looked like it was. I mean, Sam Howell threw 4 picks. He took 9 sacks. The Commanders had trouble getting anything going on the ground. I mean, Brian Robinson looked good. He had 10 carries for 70 yards, but they had to ditch the run game pretty early. So the run game was more or less a non-factor throughout the game. And then going back, to Sam Howell's picks and sacks, his receivers didn't really have a chance to do anything. This is looking like it's going to be statistically Terry McLaurin's worst season of his career, which is sad because I think Terry McLaurin could be a Hall of Fame player if given the right opportunities. Curtis Samuel actually led the team with only 54 yards. They did get Cole Turner involved. They did get Jahan Dotson involved, which a special note, Jahan Dotson is a receiver that I definitely expected to come into the season and make a larger impact than he has. And that's a situation to monitor because he has been touted as one of the, the next big things. And, maybe he could have come in and taken Terry McLaurin's place whenever there were potential talks about them moving Scary Terry. That never materialized. And it's starting to look like this is why. Dotson just doesn't have the chemistry with Howell. And this offense just cannot seem to get anything going. Antonio Gibson lost a fumble, which really sucks for him. It looks like Antonio Gibson might not be re-upped come contract year thanks to Brian Robinson's success. And then Antonio Gibson's kind of decrease in what he's allowed to do on the field. His touches have decreased majorly. He's not being used as much in the receiving game as he was prior. So it does look like he might be on his way out. But again, Washington couldn't get anything going. Their defense couldn't stop anything that the Bills were doing. Their secondary looked lost. I mean, I like their linebackers. I like Washington's linebackers, but, Daron Payne was a little banged up going into this game. The front seven looked bad. Chase Young looked good, but virtually everybody else in that front seven did not look good. Cameron Curl got involved quite a bit, but it was one of those things where, again, when you're in the secondary and every ball is coming to the mid or the secondary level, it is easier to pad your stats, and that is kind of what happened there. So it was one of these games where it just looked like Washington was outclassed from point A to point B, and the Bills really had a statement game here. The Bills look like the Bills of old, where they can kind of come in and do whatever they want, and they did this without Josh Allen having a legendary day. Josh Allen went 20 of 32 for 218 yards, a touchdown, and a pick, which doesn't necessarily trim down on the turnovers by Josh Allen. But it was he managed the game well enough for it to, not matter. James Cook was cooking on the ground at 15 carries for 98 yards. He didn't find the end zone, but, who cares? It didn't matter. Josh Allen had 3 carries for 46 and a touchdown, looked fantastic on the ground. Latavius Murray, again, was eating up those red zone carries, ended up in the end zone. And it was just one of those things where Stephon Diggs had a great game, right? 8 catches for 111, had almost 50% of the receiving yards on the team. And then everybody else kind of got sprinkled in behind him. But Buffalo's defense returned to form. Terrell Bernard, they replaced Tremaine Edmonds in-house with another linebacker they already had. Terrell Bernard's off to a historic start to his season. He had 7 tackles, 5 of them solo, 2 sacks, 2 tackles for loss, 2 quarterback hits. Like, the dude is an absolute menace. He also had an interception, if I'm not mistaken. Taron Johnson looked good. Daquan Jones looked good. Matt Milano's a beast. Matt Milano's been around for years and years, and he looked fantastic against the Commanders. Jordan Poyer looked good against the Commanders. Micah Hyde's working back from that injury. He got involved. Trey White looked good all day in the passing game. Leonard Floyd looked crisp. Ed Oliver, shout out to another Houston native. But Ed Oliver looked really good. And just cumulatively, this was a fantastic outing by the Buffalo Bills, who are now 2-1. And this is really what you want to see from Buffalo. It's starting to look like Buffalo can they can make a run. Do I think that they're better than the Miami Dolphins? No. But do they look better than the Chiefs right now? Also, no. But it's a pretty even field between them and the Chiefs for that second spot in the AFC. And the only reason there's a runaway first place for the first spot in the AFC is going to be because Miami, they had 736 scrimmage yards against the Denver Broncos. So you have to slot them at 1, at least for now. But Buffalo does look like that clear cut, like they are tied for that second place seed right now in the AFC. And if you're a Buffalo fan, if you're part of the Bills Mafia, this was fantastic, especially, again, considering Washington was undefeated coming into this game, considering Washington had looked better going into week 2 than they had week 1, there was a natural level of progression there. Maybe Sam Howell figures this out. Maybe their defense is legit. Buffalo crushed all of that for them. I do hope Washington comes back. But as of where it stands right now, Washington's got a lot of work to do, and Buffalo looks like once again they can compete for Kings of the AFC. Jumping forward to the next big game of this Sunday that I'm going to cover today, we have the Atlanta Falcons versus the Detroit Lions. This was a cool game for me because if you know, I've always been a huge fan of the underdogs, and the Lions are always underdogs. I've become quite the closet Detroit Lion fan over the past couple of years. And this was an awesome game, right? Detroit's hampered by injuries on both sides of the ball. They've lost a lot of their big name players already. Amon St. Brown was banged up. Luckily, he got the go-ahead to play. But they're missing, like CJ Gardner-Johnson, the big free agent acquisition at cornerback is already gone. And like it's one of these things where there were a lot of people doubting the Lions, myself included. If you're turning into the gambling pod that I'm putting out every Saturday/Sunday, I took Atlanta to cover in this game. I really thought Atlanta was going to give them a run for their money. I assumed that the injuries had finally stacked up to the point where Detroit wouldn't look quite as good. And boy, was I wrong. And this was one of the games that I was really glad to be wrong about because Detroit looked amazing. I mean, granted, Desmond Ridder is kind of trending in the wrong direction. He's a game manager, but he's not managing games very well. And Detroit really pounced on the opportunity to show that. But again, this was a fantastic outing by the Lions. Good teams find ways to win no matter what. And the Lions did it. They're missing David Montgomery. Jahmyr Gibbs stepped in with 17 carries for 80 yards. So he looked good all day. They got Craig Reynolds and Zonovan Knight involved. Maybe not to the same effect, but they still got involved. And they were able to churn out a 3.8 and a 4.3 yards per carry average, respectively. Jared Goff looked really good again. He didn't do as well for my fantasy teams as I would have liked, but Jared Goff looks like the Jared Goff of last year, where he's just slinging the rock. Goff looks happy, and honest to God, it looks like he might be in the line for a contract extension that he has earned. I didn't like the first contract extension that he got. I felt like he was a little overrated, but Dan Campbell has really yoked the best out of Jared Goff, and then we're seeing the best Goff that we've ever seen right now. And I mean, granted, he had a 66% completion rating, right? 22 of 33 for 243 yards, a touchdown and a pick with a 7.4 yard per pass average. But it was plenty good enough to win this game. And he gets so many people involved despite, maybe not having a whole lot. They cut, 3 receivers in the preseason. Jameson Williams is still on the bench right now. He's halfway through his gambling suspension for betting on college ball. So they're working with a pretty limited receiving core, but Amon-Ra St. Brown was amazing despite being banged up. He had 9 catches for 102. Sam Laporta, who came out of nowhere, had 8 catches for 84 and a touchdown. That dude's a stud, and if he's available on any waiver wire that you can find, pick him up because he has been magnificent all season. Khalif Raymond got involved with 4 catches for 55. Jahmyr Gibbs was kind of strangely not as involved in the passing game as I expected him to be, but because he was the bell cow runner, it did make a little more sense. But Detroit looked good. I mean, they just, in every facet of the game, their defense absolutely bullied Atlanta. Brian Branch being the keynote guy on defense that I'm going to talk about today, because Brian Branch out of Alabama, rookie safety, was amazing. And he has been good all season so far for Detroit, and it's looking like he really was the steal in the draft. He ended up slipping in the draft a little bit, and when Detroit took him, people said that, maybe he could be a gem if he came back from the injury sustained in college and this, that, and the other. And dude's back, baby. That guy could ball. He is an absolute dog, and he is so good for this defense. He had 11 solo tackles, didn't have any sacks, but he had 3 tackles for loss and 2 passes defended. And you can't really ask for more from a rookie safety. I mean, the dude's getting involved early and often, and he looks good doing so. And outside of him, Jerry Jacobs had a great game. Tracy Walker III had a great game. Jack Campbell, another rookie at middle linebacker, is getting better every week, and he had a great game. Alex Anzalone, also another linebacker, looks really good for them. Aiden Hutchinson is an absolute monster. Charles Harris looked good. Derek Barnes looked good. This was just a very, and I hate to keep using the same words, but as a cumulative effort, Detroit looked fantastic. And again, they were beating up on an Atlanta team that has not been scoring a bunch of points and has been more or less relying on a defense that looks surprisingly good this year. And to that effect, they held Detroit to only 20 points. So Atlanta's defense really is playing well. It is more or less their offense that is letting them down, and they did. But Detroit was able to hold Bijan Robinson to 10 carries for 33 yards, and they dipped out of the running game. Tyler Algier had 7 for 12. It's just one of these things where Detroit was beating up on them early and often. Desmond Ridder went 21 of 38 for 201 yards. He had another game with no interceptions. He's been pretty efficient considering the 7 sacks that he took, but it's just not enough. He's not stretching that field enough to really impact these games. And it's evident, his number 1 receiver was Kyle Pitts this week with 41 yards on 5 catches. And that's not enough to win games. It is promising to see Desmond Ridder spreading the ball around. However, his 2 best receivers this week were Kyle Pitts and Jonnu Smith. And as I've said about Atlanta before, targeting your 2 tight ends more than anybody else on the team is not the way to do it. Drake London's your big keynote guy, and he had 2 catches for 31. Mac Hollins had 1 for 23. Desmond Ridder is really going to have to learn how to move the ball to his wide receivers and get this offense more engaged in a passing attack before Atlanta is actually a threat to the NFL. And that's pretty much all I've got to say about them, because they're just things that Atlanta needs to be able to do before they can compete, things that the Detroit Lions are doing. And to wrap this game up, Detroit looks like I can't say a powerhouse yet, but Detroit does look like they are going to make a run for first place in their division, and that division is wide open. So the NFC North is going to be a really crazy place come the end of the season, and I am absolutely here for it this year. Next game up is going to be the New Orleans Saints versus the Green Bay Packers. And honestly, this game would have gone on my lesser list and the one that I'm going to cover in the next episode this week. However, Green Bay staged an incredible comeback, and despite the circumstances around it, right? The Saints did suffer an injury to Derek Carr. He is now week to week, and the Saints beat up on the Packers really bad. They scored 17 unanswered and were coasting to the end of the game. The second half, the Packers launched an 18-point comeback, ending in an end-of-the-game score that ended up icing the whole thing. The Packers looked good, despite not having Aaron Jones. And again, if you tuned into my gambling show, I actually took the Packers to cover in this one, which they didn't. But I liked the Packers because I thought Aaron Jones was going to be playing, and it does seem to be that the Packers are a little limited when Aaron Jones doesn't play. As it turns out, one of Aaron Rodgers' favorite targets was actually one of the better players on the team, and the team plays significantly better when Aaron Jones is in the game. However, they still managed to find a way. They did not have a run game. It looks like A.J. Dillon is almost a bust, which is sad because I really wanted Houston to take him. He looked really good coming out of Boston College, but it's one of those things where not everybody that excels at the collegiate level is able to replicate that in the pros. And, the jury's not out. A.J. Dillon's still young. He's on his rookie contract. Maybe he would need a change of scenery to really be better. Or maybe he's just going to be that plug-and-play secondary back for the rest of his season that eats up goal line yardage. Whatever the case ends up being, he did not look good on the ground. Green Bay ended up abandoning the run game pretty early. A.J. Dillon had 11 for 33 without a touchdown. So the run game was a non-factor, which is evident in the 17-0 run New Orleans had on him. However, Jordan Love got it done on the ground, 9 carries for 39 and a touchdown. And Jordan Love didn't look terrible through the air. It was another inefficient week for him. He did not look great last week, and he carried that over into this week. But at a 50% completion rating, he went 22 of 44 for 259, a touchdown and a pick, only took 1 sack. That offensive line is protecting him pretty well. And he's moving the ball around quite a bit. He was missing Christian Watson in the passing game along with Aaron Jones. They have just a roster of injured players right now. So the next man up mentality kicked in there in the second half. Romeo Doubs had a great game with 5 catches for 73 yards and a touchdown. Rookie Jaden Reed got involved early, and he had 3 catches for 63. He looked really good. Luke Musgrave got involved with 6 catches for 49. Dontavian Wicks, 4 for 45. Patrick Taylor, 3 for 23. And it whittles down after that. But Jordan Love he is spreading this ball around in a way that's very reminiscent of quarterbacks of old. And it's good to see. And this 18-point comeback here in the fourth quarter was amazing to watch. If you tuned in, there in the fourth quarter, Green Bay flicked a switch and they were unstoppable. Granted, it was after Derek Carr went down and Jameis Winston came in. But Jameis Winston didn't look terrible on offense for New Orleans. He couldn't score. They had a lot of issues. New Orleans also didn't have a run game. This ended up being more of a defensive matchup than I anticipated it being. But New Orleans never got anything going. Derek Carr was 13 of 18 for 103 when he went down. He did have a touchdown and no picks, but it wasn't a game to write home about. Jameis Winston was 10 of 16 for 101. Again, no scores. They had the run game was not there. Keandre Miller had 9 for 34. Tony Jones Jr. had 8 for 31. Taysom Hill got in a couple of times with 4 carries for 12 yards. Raheed Shaheed only had 1 carry for nothing. And it's just one of these things where it felt like New Orleans just did not have an answer going into the fourth quarter. And it did feel like the morale of the team took a dip when Derek Carr went down. Chris Olave had another great game. It's looking like he's going to be an absolute stud. Mike Thomas had 6 catches for 50 yards, and quite frankly, at this point in the season, should be one of the people being considered for comeback player of the year. Because although he's not posting 150 yards every week, he has been a very consistent contributor to this New Orleans offense for the first time in years. And if you're a fan of New Orleans, if you're a fan of football, if you're a fan of Mike Thomas in general, you like to see that. Like, it is nice to see Mike Thomas back on the field and playing again after all of these years of controversy with the toe injuries and what have you. But they had nothing to show for on offense. It didn't matter what they did. Once Derek Carr went down, New Orleans offense kind of went out the door, and it became a very, very singular game where New Orleans couldn't get anything going. Whereas Green Bay's defense looked great in the fourth quarter. Green Bay's defense really looked good throughout the game. New Orleans only scored 17 points. They had 2 touchdowns and a field goal. This was not a game to write home about for New Orleans in any facet of the game. Whereas Green Bay, they did what they needed to do. They only gave up 17 points through 3 quarters. And then, they looked really good in the fourth quarter. Again, beating the dead horse on that, but Rudy Ford had a great game. Darnell Savage still looks really good. Quay Walker had a great game. Isaiah McDuffie looked really good. Corey Ballantyne looked really good. Kenny Clark looked like a return to form in his younger years. He looks great, just eating up defenders on the interior. Rashawn Gary was able to get involved, had 4 quarterback hits, something that he hasn't had very many times. It's just one of these things where it was a very group effort. However, Green Bay looked really good, and they made this list despite only winning this game by 1 point because they were able to stage a fourth quarter comeback, Jordan Love's first of his starting career, just like his predecessor. Very good in the fourth quarter, and they were able to get everything done that needed to be done. Whereas New Orleans was left looking for answers. We don't necessarily know what we're going to see from New Orleans next week, courtesy of the Derek Carr injury. And their defense fell apart in the fourth quarter. So you've got to wonder what New Orleans is really going to do adjustment-wise to keep this from happening, because New Orleans has not looked necessarily good this season. And this absolute collapse on their end looks worse than they have in previous weeks. And it just begs to question, where do we go from here for the New Orleans Saints? They are in a tough division, sort of. They still have a pretty easy track to the playoffs, playing in the same division as the Atlanta Falcons. But, it's one of these things where if Derek Carr is away from the game for too long, New Orleans might lose their opportunity to fight for that division leader playoff spot. And this game could be the turnaround, or the back turn for them that has absolute end of season implications. So we're going to be able to look back on week 3 now and kind of get a gauge on what went wrong, or maybe where the tide may have turned for New Orleans. Only the future can tell. Moving on to the next game, we are going to talk about the Cleveland Browns versus the Tennessee Titans. And honestly, this game would have gone into my more or less the same critiques as usual list had Cleveland not absolutely shown out. We got to see the best version of Deshaun Watson that we've seen in a Cleveland uniform so far. The run game was not necessarily there, but we got to see a glimpse of, the players that are going to take Nick Chubb's spot. Shout out to Nick Chubb. His injury was very gruesome. And luckily, we're being told by the medical officials and whomever else is taking a look at him that it's a torn MCL. It is not as serious as what everybody originally thought. His knee does not need to be reconstructed like it did when he took the exact same hit in Georgia. And it does look like he is going to be able to make a full return to form, which is amazing for ball. Nick Chubb deserves every good blessing that comes his way because he plays hard, he doesn't complain, and he is one of the best backs in the league, bar none. But before I get in on gushing over the Cleveland Browns, which again, if you know me at all, I am actually a closet Browns fan, and I have been a Browns fan for many years now. But to talk about the Titans, Ryan Tannehill regressed again. I would be willing to bet that this is going to be the last year that we see Ryan Tannehill start in a Titans jersey. Their run game was abysmal. Derrick Henry was absolutely erased from the game plan. And you've got to wonder if maybe the injuries started to stack up and maybe Derrick Henry is losing a little bit of that King Henry feel that we've seen over the last couple of years. But Tyjae Spears couldn't get anything going. The critics have been absolutely hammering away about how good he looks as the RB2 in Tennessee. I talked about both of them last week and how they looked so good. And it does look, they were both erased from the game completely. There was no receiving to be talked about. Again, Ryan Tannehill only threw for 104 yards. So there was no offense on Tennessee's side. This game was a blowout, and it was not, the score is not as intense as what the actual field play looked like. Their number one receiver was DeAndre Hopkins. He had 3 catches for 48 yards. There were questions about him even playing this week, and honestly, I feel bad for Hop. He left Houston, now he's in Tennessee, and it looks like he's almost following the same arc that Andre Johnson did, where when Andre Johnson left Houston, he was majorly less impactful than he was when he played for the Texans, and Hop is being underutilized in an offense that does not have a consistent quarterback whatsoever. And when Ryan Tannehill returns to this form, this version of Ryan Tannehill that just can't move the ball and almost plays scared all game, you're not seeing anything at all. DeAndre Hopkins and Chris Moore. Chris Moore had 2 catches for 41. They were the only 2 impactful receivers that even played for the Tennessee Titans this week. Ryan Tannehill lost a fumble, or he didn't lose a fumble, but he fumbled the ball once. So Tennessee just didn't have an offense. It didn't matter if their defense played good. It didn't matter if they laced up in any of the right ways. Tennessee had 0 offense. So their defense was gassed all game, and Cleveland ran rampant on the Tennessee defense. Now, to gush over the Cleveland Browns. They had no run game, but it didn't matter. Pierre Strong had 6 carries for 27 yards. He was the team leader in rushing yards. Jerome Ford, who was the keynote starter for Cleveland in the run game, had 10 carries for 18. He was not efficient. However, he did find the end zone. Deshaun Watson looked good in the run game. He had 4 carries for 16. He only runs when he needs to, and that was the same story that he sung in Houston. But it was a very complete game by Cleveland, both on offense and on defense. Watson ended up going 27 of 33 for 289 and 2 touchdowns. This was, again, the closest that he has come to his peak days in Houston, or even to what he looked like when he played for Clemson. So that bodes well for Cleveland. Amari Cooper went absolutely off this game. On my bench for 2 of my fantasy leagues, no doubt. But Amari Cooper went absolutely off. He had 7 catches for 116 and a touchdown. Donovan Peoples-Jones got involved for the first big game of the year with 3 for 49. Elijah Moore had 9 catches on 9 targets. He only had 49 yards, but they are using the mess out of Elijah Moore, and I love that. As somebody that really enjoyed Elijah Moore for the Jets and didn't necessarily understand their eagerness to get rid of him, Elijah Moore is being used in this offense now, despite losing a fumble, but he's being used in this offense more and more every week, and I am here for it. You move over to the defense. Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. This is another name that I screw up a lot. I don't have the fancy pronunciations that ESPN is able to give their announcers. But as the key linebacker for the Browns, he looked really good. Myles Garrett is trying to win Defensive Player of the Year, and he looks fantastic this season. Alex Wright and Anthony Walker Jr. both looked really good. Their secondary looked really good. Denzel Ward, Juan Thornhill, Grant Delpit, all of these guys were contributing to this game, and they were able to make Tennessee turn in their worst game of the season, which is saying something because it's not like they've had fantastic outings up until this point. And Cleveland's defense looks legit. Cleveland's defense right now looks like a top 5 defense in the NFL. Their offense is starting to jive. It looks like that chemistry is really starting to hit for them right now. And I love it. As much as I think that the Deshaun Watson contract was stupid, and I've talked about this in the past, the guaranteed money and their eagerness to get rid of Baker Mayfield and this, that, and the other, like I did not agree with that entire situation, but it is nice to see Cleveland's offense firing on all cylinders. And it begs to question, the Ravens lost an interesting game to the Colts this week, and they were really the top dogs in that division. I know the Steelers won, and we'll talk about that coming up, but Cleveland looks like they could potentially run away with this division, especially after already having a dub over Cincinnati and the Joe Burrow debacle with this calf injury that's hampering him. So this could be the year of the Browns. And again, if you're a fan of ball, or if you're a Cleveland Browns fan, or if you like the underdog really pulling through, Cleveland has been an underdog since inception, right? They are just historically terrible. And it's looking like we may see the best season out of the Cleveland Browns that any of us have seen yet. And, hell yeah to that, brother. Like, that is going to be awesome. And just like previously mentioned, moving on, we had the Steelers versus the Raiders. And quite frankly, this was a terrible primetime game. I'm not sure how this game got slotted into the primetime over some of the other games that we've already talked about. It was a defensive slugfest. However, despite that, it was a pretty good game. This was Kenny Pickett's first game with multiple touchdowns in the same game. The Steelers had some semblance of a run game. Despite it not being great, it did exist. And Kenny Pickett was able to spread this ball around in a way that, made sense. The Steelers offense looks like it could be potentially getting better. I know I've been a pretty massive critic of them in the past. I kind of gushed over them in the preseason just like everybody else, and they've disappointed me just like they have everyone else. But Pittsburgh looks like they might be able to figure some things out, and they might actually be a good team. Mike Tomlin sucks at losing, so it is nice to see him pulling out a dub here. But I don't know if you can really be excited about this game by the Steelers outside of Kenny Pickett showing true progression and actually getting better as the season is going on. The Raiders really gave this game away. They are very, very unilateral. There's just not enough to the Steelers, or not to the Steelers. There's not enough to this Vegas offense to really make them scary. Jimmy G is not playing well. He was brought in, the big knock on Jimmy G his entire career was that he didn't have a deep ball. And what it looks like the problem is now is that he stares down one person. They refuse to use Hunter Renfrow in this offense, and he just over targets Devontae Adams, who had 13 catches for 20 targets. He had 172 yards and 2 touchdowns, had a great game, but those were Jimmy's only points. Right? He threw 3 interceptions and only the 2 touchdowns. He had 324 yards overall on 28 of 44, but he was only targeting Devontae, and it seemed like there were more just messy plays involved with him over targeting Devontae than there were him trying to spread the ball around to the rest of the team. Jacoby Myers looked good. He missed the second week courtesy of the concussion that he obtained in the first week of the regular season. And Jacoby returned to form pretty well. He had 7 catches on 12 targets for 85, no scores, but Jacoby Myers looks good. But beyond that, there's just a precipitous downfall of just poor play. Josh Jacobs had 3 catches for 18 yards. Hunter Renfrow, again, 2 catches for 17 yards. DeAndre Carter was barely involved. Amir Abdullah did have one really good catch over the middle that went for a first down, but he only had 2 for 16. And this Vegas offense does not look like a well-oiled machine. It is a very rusty machine, and it looks like Jimmy G may not have been the best quarterback to lead this offense. And honestly, I think a lot of the blame is going to fall on McDaniels, the head coach. And quite frankly, he has never been good anywhere but as the New England offensive coordinator. And once again, it's starting to rear its ugly head that maybe being a head coach is too much for him to handle. Josh Jacobs luckily didn't have negative run yards, but on 17 carries was only able to peel out 62 total run yards. Like he hasn't hit 100 scrimmage yards at all this season. And for somebody who missed the entire preseason and every snap of the preseason trying to fight for a new contract that he didn't ultimately get, it doesn't look like anything is clicking for the Raiders. And we may see a lot of turnover going into next season, including, if I'm Devontae Adams, there's a chance that I'm requesting another trade. He left Green Bay after Aaron Rodgers left Green Bay, but this is not a good place for him. He is getting older. No matter how much production is there for him, Devontae wants to win, and the Las Vegas Raiders are not a winner right now. Their defense looked bad. They've got players. I love Divine Diablo. I have since he made it into the league. He looked good last night. Bob Spillane, another Green Bay Packers spillover. Bob Spillane looked good. Marcus Peters looked amazing. Marcus Peters has looked good since his Baltimore days. He is a very good corner, but he can't do it all. Nate Hobbs, another not bad player, did not have a bad game. Max Crosby was in the quarterback's face every play, but it just feels like Vegas can't get anything going. Their defense gets tired because of their offense's inability to score points, and the Steelers really took advantage of that. Kenny Pickett was able to go 16 of 28, albeit not a super efficient game, but he had 235 yards and 2 touchdowns. Again, his only dual touchdown game of his career. Najee Harris had 19 carries for 65. Again, not very efficient, but he was able to help manage the game. I do think that, possibly it is time to kind of work Jaylen Warren more into the game plan. And each week he is receiving more carries. But for an offense that's geared around run first, it does feel like Pittsburgh sucks at running the ball. And that is probably a little bit to do with Matt Canada. I am not a Matt Canada fan, and I do think that this Pittsburgh offense could be better if maybe they had a more aggressive play caller in there for them. But, it wasn't bad. Kenny Pickett looked like Daniel Jones on a good day, right? Like he was running the ball with his feet. He looked pretty good on the ground. Turns out Kenny Pickett's got wheels, right? And he spread the ball around in a way that should have impressed virtually anybody. George Pickens led the team, and George Pickens is an absolute dog. He had 4 catches for 75 yards. Calvin Austin had that massive touchdown catch over the middle that he ended up taking for a bunch of yards. Calvin Austin the third looked great. Pat Freiermuth got involved quite a bit. He had 3 for 41. He looked really good. Allen Robinson, a player that I've actually been a fan of his entire career in the NFL, got involved, and it looks like they may be trying to use Allen Robinson a little more in the slot, which, as they said in the game, the commentators said the same thing, but Allen Robinson's one of the biggest slot receivers you may ever see, and that dude's got golden hands. Like, he catches everything thrown his way, and it's going to be really cool to see if Allen Robinson is more involved in this offense moving forward. But this was a good effort by the Pittsburgh Steelers. They did just enough. Did the Raiders try and come back on them in the fourth quarter? Yes. Did the Raiders botch a game-winning drive there at the end to ice the victory? Yes, but that is a testament to how good this Pittsburgh defense is. Minkah Fitzpatrick had another terrific game. Quan Alexander looks like he's returning to form, and he looked good as an anchor in the middle. Levi Wallace, a cornerback that came over from the Bills, he looked really good. Cole Holcomb had a couple of dumb penalties called against him, but he looked fantastic at middle linebacker. Patrick Peterson had a pick or two. He looks great despite being older, and I want to hamp on Patrick Peterson a little bit because I have loved Patrick Peterson. Again, this was one of the guys that I looked up to as a kid. Patrick Peterson looks like he is playing out of his mind for the age that he is now. I believe he's 32 now, and Patrick Peterson looks really good in this defense. Keanu Neal, somebody coming over from the Falcons, he looks really good. TJ Watt was in the quarterback's face all day. Him and Max Crosby are friends in real life. And despite TJ Watt maybe not posting the greatest stat line of the day, TJ Watt looks like he is going to fight every second of every game for Defensive Player of the Year. And he might actually be the best defender in the NFL right now. It's very variable. It's week to week. There are a lot of dogs on defense throughout the league. TJ Watt should be at the top of every list. Maybe not one, but top 5 on every list. And I love that. I have nothing against the Steelers. I love the terrible towel. Shout out to Gene, Mean Gene, the Sports King, the guy that got me into podcasting in the beginning. He is a massive Steelers fan, and that's actually how I ended up getting inducted into his little team there for a while. I know a lot about the Steelers. I like the Steelers. I love Mike Tomlin, and I like what they're able to do with the personnel that they have on their team year in and year out. And this was a very good showing by the Steelers. Again, probably not the best primetime game, but it was a very good game by the Steelers. It was a very definitive win for them, and it slotted them 2-1. They look good in the AFC North. Do I think that they are better than either Baltimore or Cleveland? No. Do I think that they can beat Cincinnati right now? Quite possibly. So having the Steelers at least third place in the AFC North is a crazy thing, considering I really thought they might be in the cellar this year. And if Kenny Pickett can get better, if he can really progress, if we can see more of the evolution of Kenny Pickett where he is able to stretch the field with his arm, the Steelers could be very lethal and could be a team to watch down the stretch. So that would be something to monitor moving forward, is the Pittsburgh Steelers might be legit this year. We are coming up to the end of this one, more or less. I've got 2 more games that I want to cover, 2 more teams that I want to kind of talk about and kind of flesh out the future for. The second to last of which is going to be the Chargers versus the Vikings game. And if you are one of my listeners for the gambling pod that I'm putting out as well, you would know that this is a game that I picked to be one of the better games of the week. This is one of the games that I was personally most excited to watch, and it was a semi-dud, right? Just to kind of talk about the game itself a little bit, the end of the game kind of went shakily, right? The Vikings could have won this game. They didn't. The Vikings ended up losing 28-24. TJ Hawkinson dropped a ball in the end zone that ultimately ended up getting intercepted, and it iced the game for the Chargers. But Kirk Cousins looks amazing. And I can't say this enough. Through 3 games of this season, Kirk Cousins looks amazing. However, in the words of my uncle and the guy that taught me everything that I know about football, Kirk Cousins is the prime example of why the NFL or football in general is a team game and not a single person game, right? Because Kirk Cousins looks amazing. However, with no run game to speak of and a defense that's got more holes than a sponge, right? The Minnesota Vikings have choked off 3 games in a row, and quite frankly, they should be 3-0. And I said something a little similar to this last week, but it really feels like the Vikings are better than their record, and it really goes to show that a better defense and even a semi-competent run game can really propel you into that upper echelon of teams. Right. And that's not to take away from what the Vikings had. This was Alexander Madison's best game as the starter for the Vikings. He did have 93 yards on the ground. And it's just one of those things where Kirk had to do too much again because his defense allows so many points. But Kirk had 50 pass attempts. You don't want your quarterback throwing 50 times. I don't care what team it is. I don't care how many games you win. You don't want that kind of usage on your quarterback, especially when they're getting a little older like Kirk is. It is just one of those things where you don't want that use on your quarterback. He went 32 of 50 for 367, 3 touchdowns and a pick. That pick is the pick that ultimately ended up sealing the game. He took 4 sacks. And again, the run game was better this week than it has been prior, but you really want to see more coming to just take a little bit off the quarterback. And it was one of these things where the Chargers kept packing on points, and the Vikings had to throw the ball in the end to really keep up. Justin Jefferson had a great game, of course. He ended up getting a little shaken up there at the end of the game, and that is something to monitor. I'm not sure if it was the ankle or the knee. I'm pretty sure it was an ankle injury, and I'm pretty sure he is okay. But if Justin Jefferson goes down, this team takes a massive hit. I don't care how good Jordan Addison is. There is not a receiver in this league that can replace Justin Jefferson's stat line, sans maybe Devontae Adams. Right? So Justin Jets went 7 catches for 149 yards and a touchdown, right? Dog. TJ Hawkinson, the guy who ultimately ended up losing this game for the Vikings, had 8 catches for 78 yards. He looks good. Did Detroit fleece Minnesota on the Hawkinson trade? Yes. But is TJ Hawkinson really good at football? Also, yes. It never should have come down to that make or break play on the goal line for Minnesota to win this game. Again, my big critique with this game is going to be Minnesota's defense choking away what should have been a very quality win over a Chargers team that was also winless coming into this game, but another team that had really overperformed in every way but defense and just come up short 2 games in a row prior, right? So Jordan Addison, rookie first-round pick, had 6 catches for 52 yards. Didn't find the end zone this week, but had a good game. KJ Osborne had 1 catch for 36 and a touchdown. You love to see that for him. Madsen had 5 catches for 32. He looked good, over 100 yards from scrimmage, so it was good for him. And then it just dropped off significantly behind him. However, TJ Hawkinson lost a fumble, and their defense, to put an asterisk next to what I'm about to say, the Chargers offense is historically good. Justin Herbert's having an amazing season, right? The Chargers do everything right on offense. Again, they're just another team with a bad defense right now, but the Vikings defense couldn't stop anything. They couldn't slow the bleed, and it just didn't matter at the end because the Vikings defense can't prop up this offense that really is just playing so well. Byron Murphy had a great game. Caleb Evans, I'm pretty sure is how you pronounce that game, had a great game, had 11 total tackles, 7 of them were solo. Like they played a good game, but this is another tale where Justin Herbert was throwing dimes all over the field. The secondary was making tackles. Four of their top defenders in this game all play at either the mid or the second level. So you're looking at Caleb Evans, Byron Murphy Jr., Jordan Hicks, and Cameron Bynum leading the team, all of which are on the back end. You have Mekhi Blackman who got involved. He had a pretty solid game. And then beyond him, you have Josh Metellus. Danielle Hunter looked okay. Danielle Hunter is not the same player that we have seen in years prior, just like Harrison Smith. Harrison Smith looks like he might be on the way out of Minnesota whenever his contract, says that is feasible. And beyond him, their defense just didn't put together a good game for a 3rd week in a row. And it looks like Minnesota's probably going to hammer home defense in this year's draft, which is good for them, but you want to see more win now, right? Because Captain Kirk is getting older. He is not going to play much better than he is right now. There's only so much he can do. You can hope that Cam Akers being traded to the Vikings is going to positively impact this team. And honestly, I think it will. I think a tandem at running back is going to help Alexander Mattison. And this really, it'll help expand on the offense. But that's not going to help the defense being so porous. And that's the big takeaway from this game is that no matter what, Minnesota cannot put together a complete game. They can play as well as they want on offense. They can have a decent special teams game. But at the end of the day, Minnesota cannot put together a solid defensive outing, at least not yet, and that is going to keep them from winning games in the foreseeable future. On the flip side of the coin, I am a massive Oregon Ducks fan. I have been my entire life. Justin Herbert played for the Oregon Ducks. That dude went 40 of 47 for 405 yards, 3 touchdowns, and no picks. He continues his streak of no turnovers, and Justin Herbert is playing just absolutely lights out. However, there was one other quarterback on this team that made an amazing play, ended up getting me a dub in fantasy, and that would be Mr. Keenan Allen, who went 1 of 1 for 49 yards and a touchdown, redeeming himself from the last time that they allowed him to throw a football, whereas he threw a pick. So I love that. I love that they allowed Keenan Allen to play this trick play, and I love that Herbie is playing at such a high level. It's unfortunate that the Chargers defense is still not playing well. Their head coach, Brandon Staley, was supposed to be a more defensive-minded coach. some people, joke and they say that he's a defensive genius and that he's fallen apart. I like Brandon Staley. I think he's a little too conservative. I think Kellen Moore was an amazing pickup for the OC here. And we could potentially see Brandon Staley get ousted and Kellen Moore take over that role if they want to stay in-house for the head coach. That is to be determined. The Chargers are a very good team. Their offense was amazing. Keenan Allen had 18 catches for 215 yards. Mike Williams had 7 catches for 121 yards and a touchdown. Although Mike Williams did tear his ACL, he is out for the season. So it'll be interesting to see where they end up going to as their wide receiver 2 moving forward, especially if Austin Eckler continues to stay injured, right? But Joshua Palmer got heavily involved in the offense, had 4 catches for 66 and a touchdown. And Donald Parham Jr. got more than 1 catch. He was targeted twice. I would like to see a little more out of him, but Gerald Everett had 6 catches for 30 on 6 targets. Quentin Johnston got into the game. He had 3 targets. He only caught 2 of them for 10 yards, but we could see more Quentin Johnston moving forward. He was very good for TCU. So it would be cool to see him be more involved with the Mike Williams injury. But their defense was maybe not the star of the game. Again, they played poorly. They held Minnesota to only 24 points. And that was good in itself, considering how good Minnesota's offense looked. But you saw some crazy plays out of Kenneth Murray Jr. He was looking like the backbone of this defense right now. Michael Davis looked really good. Nick Neiman looked really good. Derwin James is finally healthy, and he's zooming around the field. Hopefully, Derwin James can put together a full season this year. I love Derwin James, and I love what he's able to do for this team. And he is an absolute hawk on the back end. Asante Samuel Jr. looks really, really good right now. Tuli Tuipulotu looks really good right now. Sebastian Joseph Day had a good game. And it just looks like the Chargers are putting together, they're trying to put together whole unit games. It would be nice to see Joey Bosa get more involved. He did not have the greatest day. They kind of eliminated him from the game plan. But the Chargers ended up pulling out a dub. Their defense looked better than they had the 2 weeks prior. And you're left with Minnesota has too many holes on defense, and Los Angeles is potentially putting together a winning formula moving forward. So these will be interesting teams to watch moving forward. Was I wrong about this being one of the games of the week? Yes. Was it a good game? Also, yes, unless you love TJ Hawkinson or you thought Minnesota was going to win like I did. Enough about teams playing poorly in one facet or another. I am super excited to talk about this final game. I started with the Houston Texans. I'm going to end with the Dallas Cowboys, baby. This was not a good game, but it was a good game for 49 out of the 50 continental states and most of Texas. Right? I hate the Cowboys. I've said it more than once on this show. I hate the Cowboys. And hell yeah to the Arizona Cardinals dominating Dallas at every facet of the game for a full 60 minutes. This game was awesome. Dallas looked like dog shit. I've seen a lot of people complaining that it's because they lost Trayvon Diggs. There's no way a cornerback can stop the run every play. Dallas looked bad all game. It looked like Dallas didn't prepare for this game because they've played so well against piss poor teams the first 2 weeks of the NFL. And Josh Dobbs came out. The dude looked like him all night. And they put together a hell of a game. And Dallas was the only person that was the only unit that was not a beneficiary of this. Despite the active tank by the Arizona Cardinals, even they came out and they're like, nope, not this one. And they blew the Cowboys up. You've seen a lot of, there's been a lot of conversation on ESPN and what have you about it. Dallas was pegged as the best team in the NFC and what maybe the best team in the NFL going into week 3. And this game absolutely silenced everybody that thought Dallas was just the king. Dallas was ready to be crowned. They came out in week 3 looking like they were the team that thought they should be crowned. And then Arizona put them in their place real quick, fast, and in a hurry. And this game was fun to watch. And it was only fun to watch because I hate the Cowboys. Again, this was not the greatest game in the world, but I love to see it for Josh Dobbs. Joshua Dobbs has bounced from team to team to team. He started with the Pittsburgh Steelers, and he's never had an offense built around him. He's never been that main guy. And he came out, he went 17 of 21 for 189 yards and a touchdown. He also had 6 carries for 55 yards on the ground. And this was an amazing game by Joshua Dobbs. Arizona's not rushing Kyler Murray back from his ACL injury. And it looks like they have a quarterback that can play. Josh Dobbs has improved in every game that he's been in. And it looks like he can keep them competitive against whomever he wants to be competitive against. And I'm here for it. James Conner had an amazing day. He had 14 carries for 98 yards and a touchdown. Dallas had 0 answers for him. Rondale Moore had a huge run, ended up with 3 carries for 54 and a touchdown. Keontae Ingram got in. That dude is lightning quick. Had 5 carries for 13 yards, but I do think that he is going to be bigger in the run game moving forward, definitely next season. And it was one of these things where Arizona looked like they prepared all week for the Super Bowl. Arizona looked like they were dialed in from the very first snap of the game, and they came out to a really, really quick lead, and they looked really good against Dallas. Dallas had no answers for anything. The receiving game left a little bit to be desired, but again, Josh Dobbs only had 198 total yards or 189 total yards passing, so the distribution to the receivers was what was really important. You had 2 catches by Michael Wilson for 86 yards. He was the yardage leader. Hollywood Brown had 5 for 61. James Conner had 2 for 18. Keontae Ingram caught a ball. Rondale Moore caught 4. Zach Ertz was involved, only had 2 catches, but Zach Ertz was involved. Trey McBride, the backup tight end, was involved. Josh Dobbs is spreading this ball around. And honestly, Dallas' secondary was the best part of their defense, and they still got cooked. Right? It was the run game that ultimately did it for the Arizona Cardinals, but Dallas looked sloppy and Dak looked bad. Dak really sealed this game for the Cowboys with that dumb interception over the middle of the field that every sports media outlet has been hammering on, and it was bad. Dak ended up in his post presser. He talked about it. He was like, I was trying to fit it into this gap. I thought that he was going to be able to make a play on the ball, this, that, and the other. But there were the fact of the matter is there were 3 Arizona defenders between the ball and this player, and there was a 0% chance that this ball ever made it to his intended target. So Dak did not look good. Dak has not looked great this season. This is going to be one of the big things that I hammer on until he turns this around. I know that I've been hammering Dallas. My picks on the gambling show were wrong for the cover on this one, but Dak has not looked good this year, and it really came to a head this game. Dak was 25 for 40, had 249 yards, a touchdown, and a pick. He was sacked twice, but Dak just doesn't look crisp. He's missing open receivers, and it just looks like, maybe there's going to be a quarterback controversy in the years to come with Dallas. I mean, Dak is on the hook for too much money right now, but it wouldn't be that crazy to imagine them making a switch next year, maybe the year after that, probably the year after that, but it wouldn't be that crazy for Jerry Jones to pull the plug on the Dak project. And it's sad. I like Dak Prescott at Mississippi State. I wanted Houston to draft him. Am I glad that they didn't? Yeah, I am. Now that we have CJ Stroud, it's been a long time coming, but I am glad that we didn't, because Dak, courtesy of the injuries, more than likely, courtesy of the injuries and Dallas trading Amari Cooper, Dak is just not the same Dak that he was when it really looked like, them boys could make a run for the Super Bowl if they had a couple more pieces on defense. The one thing that I can hammer on for Dallas is that Tony Pollard looked good. Tony Pollard's looked good all season. And it does look like Dallas replaced Zeke Elliott with a really good runner. But, Tony Pollard can't do it all himself. And the Cowboys look sloppy beyond him. Michael Gallup was their number 1 receiver. That's the first time this has happened this season. It's probably going to be one of the only times all year. CeeDee couldn't get anything going. They did overutilize Jake Ferguson. He looked amazing against Arizona. They could not stop Jake Ferguson. He had 5 catches for 7 targets for 48 yards. But beyond that, there was nothing to write home about, and Dallas's defense had no answers for Arizona. You can name any of the big names that you want on Dallas's defense outside of DeMarcus Lawrence. They all looked bad. And as much as I love good ball, and I emphasize how much, good things are good for a good league, and a good league is good for the consumers, fuck the Dallas Cowboys, and I could not be happier that they got buried by the Cardinals, who are actively tanking. I got so tired of hearing all the media pundits talk up Dallas like they were this juggernaut. and that they're better than the San Francisco 49ers and that they're the best team in the NFL. Well, I'm here to tell you, boys and girls, everybody listening, all of my listeners, Dallas is not the best team in the league. Dallas is not the best team in the NFC. Will they rebound from this loss? Yes. Was it a humbling loss? I sure hope so. Arizona looked crisp, and it looked like they had the blueprint to beating Dallas. And, quite frankly, Dallas is not the best team in the NFC East. The Eagles still hold that title for now, and it'll be interesting to see how Dallas rebounds, how they adjust to this new team that they have with Diggs out and a couple of other injuries that they have. It'll be interesting to see what Dallas ends up doing to try and, prevent this from happening moving forward. But that is it. So these are all of the games that I'm going to talk about in episode 1 of this week. I will cover the rest of the games in episode 2 of the week, as well as the Monday night games. We are also going to have, it's going to be a similar pre-cap for the week to come, but because of the way that I've structured this, we're going to have a little more time to kind of dig in on, maybe some of the things to watch and some of the things to look out for. So I look forward to seeing each and every one of you on my Saturday drop show. And thank you so much for tuning in. I love you all, and I will see you soon. Peace.